Pat Kelsey had an update on star point guard Chucky Hepburn's status ahead of the matchup against Miami.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Card Nation, what's going on, everyone? Welcome into this Friday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. This is my fifth year covering the University of Louisville, third year hosting this show. And I want to take the time to personally thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, the show is free and available on all streaming services 5 days a week, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here. There's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5. And if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. All you have to do, download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Pat Kelsey on Friday gave an update on the injury status of star point guard Chucky Hepburn ahead of the Saturday matchup against Miami. He went down in the game against Boston College, and we'll discuss what that update is coming up shortly. We'll preview the Miami matchup. The worst team in the ACC in the standings will take on the Cardinals at the KFC Yum Center on Saturday afternoon. We'll also discuss Dan Meske taking over as the Louisville volleyball head coach and why that was an obvious promotion for Josh Hurd. So, Pat Kelsey on Friday, it was reported by a couple different places. First by the Field of 68 on Twitter, and then he updated the local media in his Friday press conference. Chucky Hepburn went down with about 15 minutes left in the game against Boston College. The injury was classified as a lower body injury, judging by the replay and the heavy wrap. It seemed like it was a groin injury. He was on and off the bike. But ultimately, Pat Kelsey later shared that he was told that Hepburn wasn't able to come back into the game by team medical officials. So didn't really make me feel great when I heard that, but it's hard to gauge body language and demeanor, but he was laughing and smiling with his teammates on the bench. He was getting up and down for big plays. So I didn't want to look too much into that, but I was optimistic based upon that. We were told that we were going to hear an update on Thursday or potentially hear an update on Thursday. We did not, and I postponed the recording of this show from being released Friday at midnight to Friday at 5 p.m. so that we could have more of an idea on the status of Chucky Hepburn. And basically, Pat Kelsey confirmed that it was indeed a groin injury and that he was day-to-day. His status in the contest against Miami was, quote, up in the air. He was a limited, or he either was or was going to be a limited participant in practice on Friday, and the coaches and the training staff would make the decision of whether or not he would be able to go on Saturday. A couple different ways to look at this. I think that I won't call it diagnosis, but that timeline, day-to-day and questionable against Miami, it's optimistic to me because groin injuries can be tricky, and a groin injury can cost you a couple months a couple weeks on the shelf. And early February, that would be catastrophic for the Louisville Cardinals. So the fact that he's day-to-day makes me feel a little bit better because the chances of him being able to shake it off and play at full strength just a couple days later was always going to be very, very unlikely. But day-to-day and possibly playing against Miami, I feel like is much, much better than him being week to week. Now, the devil's advocate to that is that it's a soft tissue injury. It is going to come down to whether or not the pain tolerance is there, whether or not the athletic training staff deems that he's able to go. And it also is an injury that can stick around, and it's tricky to be able to fight through. And that's sort of where I'm like, okay, maybe it's best to err on the side of caution, even if he is able to play on Saturday, and maybe sit him for that game so that you can have him for the rest of the season at good health. And I'm not saying that if he were to play that he would re-injure himself, but groin injuries are tricky. So day to day sometimes isn't really like coming back the next day. It might take a week. And Louisville next week, they have 2 road games at NC State and at Notre Dame. Now, both teams aren't the greatest, but playing on the road in conference play, we saw against Georgia Tech how that could be a tough thing to do. So I think that the initial timeline is beneficial to day to day. Hopefully it's something that truly is day to day and not something that, you're just trying to not tip your hand to your opponent. So the way that I look at this, there's 2 different outcomes. Number 1, he plays and is not fully 100%, or number 2, he does not play at all. I'm not saying that you're, 100% going to beat a conference team if you sit Chucky Hepburn, but what I will say is that if you had to pick a conference opponent that you would try to get a win against with Chucky Hepburn sitting for the entirety of the game, you would likely go with Miami. Miami is the worst team in the conference. They have not had a good season. They are 5-17, 1-10 in ACC play. They've been getting blown out a ton. Their coach stepped down in the middle of the season. So this would be the game in which you feel like, okay, maybe you can survive with no Chucky Hepburn. So even if he is playing in limited fashion, he's not going to fully be himself. And I would imagine he doesn't play his full, 33 minutes a game. It's more so maybe cutting that in half, depending on how the game goes. But Louisville has the team to be able to still win this game and win it convincingly. The Cardinals showed on Wednesday that they still can succeed without Chucky on the court. Now, the difference is that Boston College had not planned for no Chucky Hepburn. Miami, even though Louisville's kind of keeping things close to chest, they still, have the opportunity to plan for the Louisville Cardinals with no Chucky Hepburn, with Terrence Edwards at the 1, and just kind of trickling down from there. Let's play the hypothetical that he would miss the game tomorrow against Miami. What needs to happen? Well, I think clearly it's all hands on deck. Everyone needs to step up, especially in the backcourt. You need Terrence Edwards to be, at the very least, serviceable at the 1. He made some good passes on Wednesday, but just has to continue to facilitate. He has to continue to be the leader, be that lead ball handler, and limit the turnovers. I think he has to limit the indecisiveness. There were times where, and there still are times where he drives into the lane and he pivots out because, there's no decision being made and it hurts the flow of the offense. So I think that Edwards just needs to make sure that the ball keeps flowing. He needs to, number 1, still be in attack mode and score. But I think that this is an opportunity to go up against one of the worst defenses in the conference. Being able to go in and do what you can to be effective. I think Rain Smith needs to shoot the ball better. If you lose those points from Chucky Hepburn, it needs to be made up for in a different way. And I think Rain Smith hasn't shot the ball well the past 2 games. He's due to get back on track. I look at 2 other guys, Javon Hadley and Abubakar Traore. I look for more ISO action with both of those guys. Get the ball to Hadley in the paint. Miami does not do a good job of rebounding the basketball. Get the ball to Traore out in the dunker spot, out in some space, clear out, and let him go to work. I think that Miami's defense is not good, to say the least. So it's all hands on deck. Look for James Scott more. I also believe that you need Kanai Roots to step up, and Noah Waterman, if he can have a performance where, I know last game was his first game back in a couple weeks stretch, but if he can shoot the ball well, if the Cardinals shoot the ball decently in this game, I think that they win it with or without Chucky. But I trust this team defensively. Miami doesn't have a terrible offense. They are without their probable best player. More on that coming up here in a second. But it's going to be one of those where it takes the whole team to be able to overcome that loss of Chucky Hepburn. But I do believe in the Cardinals. I think that Rain Smith will be a secondary ball handler. Injuries have plagued this team. Losing Hepburn takes another player out of the rotation. Maybe Frank Anselmibe plays more. You need Noah Waterman to play more. Louisville can't get in foul trouble in this game. So for me, it's just a matter of, number one, staying the course defensively, and offensively, just make sure that the ball flows. Get good looks, get good shots. This is a team that will give up offensive rebounds, attack the glass, and make them pay. So who is Louisville playing? And I don't mean like who is the opponent. Like, what is Louisville going up against on the court here in under 24 hours? Well, on paper, this is the worst team in the ACC. They did just beat Notre Dame last weekend, but if Louisville handles business, they should win this game pretty convincingly. More on this Miami team and the rough season that they're having coming up on this Friday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. The big game is almost here. There's no better way to make it even more exciting than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings awarded, Prize Picks makes it fun and simple to get in on the action. You pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. Prize Picks even has a free pick for the big game where Patrick Mahomes only needs 1 passing yard to win. Pair that with one more correct pick, and you are cashing out. Download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Once again, that's the code LOCKEDONCollege for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. Cardinal fans, want to again take the time to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day heading into February. Just a reminder, the show is free and available on all streaming services 5 days a week. Your team every day. 2 o'clock Eastern time tip-off at the KFC Yum Center. Louisville hosting the Miami Hurricanes, currently ranked in dead last in the ACC, 5-17 overall, 1-10 in conference play. Talking about a completely polarizingly different month of January and end of December. Before beating Notre Dame this past weekend, Miami had lost 10 straight games dating back to December 15th. So unlike Louisville, like literally the exact opposite, who had won 10 straight, Miami had lost 10 straight. Obviously, their head coach stepped down in the middle of the season. It has been a weird and rough season for the Miami Hurricanes. Their best player coming into the year, Nigel Pack, has only played 9 games, had a foot injury, and his timetable for return is still to be determined. So, barring something completely unknown, Miami will likely be without Nigel Pack. Now, you take a look at the net, the Hurricanes as of Thursday's games, 229th in the net, by far the lowest ranking in the Power 4, 0-10 in quad 1 and quad 2 opportunities, 1-5 in quad 3. Quad 4 is really only where they've shined, and they're still 4-2 in that regard. This is a quad 1 opportunity for the Miami Hurricanes, and Louisville sitting at 28th. This is quad 4, currently the only quad 4 game left. They've had 4 other quad 4 games: Morehead State, Bellarmine, Winthrop, and Eastern Kentucky. And hopefully it's not as close as that Eastern Kentucky game. Louisville currently, like I said, 28th in the net. Let's take a look at this Hurricanes team led by Matthew Cleveland, a player that Louisville fans likely know the name. Played at Florida State the past 2 years before transferring to Miami. Ever since he came to college basketball, he has averaged in double digits. He's having a career year this year, points per game, averaging 16. 3-point percentage, averaging 37% from the field. Rebound numbers are down significantly, and the field goal numbers are up 53%. So he's having a pretty decent season, despite Miami not having that on-court success in the win-loss column. All 5 of their starters, the shortest one is 6'3". So a tall lineup, but don't let that fool you. It's not really translating to the rebounding numbers because they're averaging about 32 rebounds a game, which is second worst in the ACC behind Virginia. It's 331st in the country out of 355 teams. So one of the keys to victory for Louisville is to attack the glass on both ends, limit the offensive rebounds, and create second chance opportunities for your offense, especially if you don't have Chucky Hepburn, or if he's limited, you will be able to, create those second chance points with James Scott, Javon Hadley, Boubacar Traore, Terrence Edwards, Kenai Roots, etc. moving down the line. Offensively, Miami doesn't have a terrible offense. They score over 70 points a game. They're not a great three-point shooting team. Like, they attempt a decent amount, 23 attempts per game, which is 160th in the country coming into Friday, but 290th in three-point percentage, 31.7%. That's worse than the Louisville Cardinals. So they're shooting a decent amount of threes. The threes just really aren't falling, and Miami is just not that great at offense, only averaging about 13 assists a game. They don't turn the ball over a ton. That's one thing, is that they're like 59th in the country in turnovers. Like, the ball security is surprisingly not bad, but they just don't get a good shot selection. Like, their catalog of shots, not really all that great. It's the defensive side that has directly associated with the lackluster, I say lackluster, but abysmal start to the year. They have the worst power forward defense when it comes to points allowed. 336th in the country. They're giving up just under 80 points a game, 79.6. So that's what I mean by saying that it's no guarantee, without Chucky Hepburn, that you're going to beat a conference opponent. But if you did play a conference opponent, the one you would want to play is Miami, because they've been giving up a ton of offense to their opponents. They also don't force a ton of turnovers. 319th in the country. They force about 10 turnovers a game. Now, Louisville's issue has been that a lot of their turnovers over the past 2 games have been either relatively or completely unforced errors. Bad passes, lazy passes, players not being on the same page, stepping on the baseline, so on and so forth. The main thing, and this is where Rain Smith comes into play. He didn't really shoot well against a bad three-point defense last game. But this game, Louisville's going to have to shoot well. And signs point to them likely doing so, because going into Friday's games, Miami was giving up about 39.5% on three-point attempts per game. For those that don't know, that is not only the worst in the ACC, but it is ranked 355th. Do you know how many teams get ranked in these rankings by the NCAA? 355. Like, this is statistically the worst three-point shooting defense, not only in the conference, not only in the Power Four, but in the entire country. So Louisville will not only get open looks, but they're going to get a good amount of them. So it's critical that the Cardinals make Miami pay and they run the score up. Because the best way to mask over Chucky Hepburn's absence, hypothetically, would be for the other guys to step up and hit some threes. It would be a nice game for Rain Smith to come back and have a game where he hits over 4 threes. Javon Hadley hits a couple. Terrence Edwards hits a couple. Kenai Roots, Noah Waterman. Like, you have the players. It's just a matter of getting the open looks. And when you get the open looks, you have to make them pay. Louisville hasn't really done that all that much at times. So the defense for Miami is just absolutely #not good. Offense isn't terrible. They don't shoot the ball well. They don't have a cohesive flow on that side of the court. But and they don't rebound well either. So if Louisville can be the enforcer in this game, I feel good about the Cardinals' chances. I don't think that there will be a spread out until probably um, probably on Saturday morning, I wouldn't say. I'm going to look that up real quick. Probably should have already looked it up, but yeah, it is what it is. Let's see. That's okay. That was football. I was like, in what way is Louisville -1 favorite against Miami? That was definitely football, and man, I wish Louisville would have won that game by 1 point, but nonetheless, it is what it is. I'm not seeing anything popping up on this, so I can't really tell you what that spread would be. I would imagine it's definitely going to be double digits. So we'll discuss what happens when we come back. But we're going to go to the volleyball side of things. Dan Meske is the new head coach of the Louisville Cardinals. This was a no-brainer move for Josh Hurd and an obvious promotion that needed to get done. We'll explain when we come back on this Friday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. We're almost there, guys. Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, two teams, endless possibilities. There's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. And if you need more of an incentive, you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl if you're new. That's the icing on the cake. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5. And if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, an official partner of Super Bowl 59. Of course, no one will ever admit this, but it felt like one of the worst kept secrets was that if the Nebraska head coaching job ever opened up, that Dani Busboom Kelly would likely take it. Everyone sort of knew that. The writing was on the wall. And when it was announced that John Cook would be stepping down, everyone felt that Dani's name would be tossed in to the conversation. Well, what we didn't know is that the announcement would be made less than an hour after that. Dani Busboom Kelly was announced pretty shortly after the John Cook announcement that she was taking over as the Cornhuskers head coach. I think the timeline, obviously, this was being worked on behind the scenes because how else would it not have been with how quickly it happened? But I was hoping that when the news happened, even before that, playing the hypothetical game, I was like, if Dani leaves, it's got to be Dan Meske. If you've ever seen Draft Day with Kevin Costner, there's that piece of paper that his player, Sonny Weaver Jr., has during the NFL draft, and it has on that paper, Vontae Mack, no matter what, he's going to take Vontae no matter what. Piece of paper says Dan Meske, no matter what. And I will say this before we talk about Dan, I don't think that you truly can thank Dani Busboom Kelly enough for absolutely transforming this program. An unprecedented amount of success over her tenure, multiple Final Fours, multiple final game appearances, ACC championships. Like, this has been the golden era of Louisville volleyball, and I couldn't imagine, not having her here for that time. She just changed the culture here at Louisville and in the city of Louisville. Volleyball has grown in fandom from L&N Arena to selling that out every game, and also having a huge crowd at the KFC Yum Center and setting records there. So her impact on this on this program, on this university, and on this city cannot be understated, and I wish her the very best of luck. She definitely took over this program and left it in a way better spot than when she found it, and I can't thank her enough. Dan Meske has served as the associate head coach for the past 8 seasons at Louisville. For me, he was the no-brainer replacement for Dani, and it seemed like, well, that was the case for many others as well. So he was the AVCA Assistant Coach of the Year in 2022, and it felt like he was just a coach in waiting. Had multiple programs approach the university about maybe hiring Meske as their head coach, and he decided to stay loyal. And I respect that a ton. And he could have gone elsewhere. He had the interest, but it seemed like the small chance, and he mentioned this in a quote, basically saying the small chance of eventually getting this job was one of the reasons that helped him stay. You saw the reactions from the players. They were definitely wanting Meske to stay. He has a huge impact on recruiting. When Louisville calls a timeout, it's usually Dan Meske talking with the clipboard, and his impact on player development, again, cannot be understated. So I have 1,000% confidence that the Cardinals can not only remain good, but remain in that elite category with Meske as the Cardinals' new head coach, I believe it's the eighth head coach in program history. Just a really good guy that I think is going to keep Louisville on this level. Now, this upcoming season, when you've lost so much from this past year's team, some of the best players in program history, you wonder if it's going to be sort of a transition year to 2026, and that could be the case. But also think that there's a ton of talent on this team, so there's a good chance that they're still going to compete for a national championship. So the fact that the Dani announcement came really quickly after the John Cook announcement, what was soon after that, literally in the same announcement, there wasn't really a public search. It was Dani Busboom Kelly steps down and takes the Nebraska job, Dan Meske to backfill that spot. There wasn't a public search. Felt like, Louisville almost sort of expected it. And they went to Dan Meske, who deserves this job. And nice that they're going to keep the staff together. Keeping Todd Chamberlain on staff, keeping some other, coaches on staff, and being able to keep a good amount of the players returning. It's huge. I can't stress enough how much I am not worried about this program. Losing Dani hurts, of course, but I think I have a ton of faith in Dan to be able to keep this program right where it's at. So, volleyball program is still in great hands. That's going to wrap up this Friday edition of the show. When we come back, well, we're going to talk about what happened on Saturday between Louisville and Miami. Everyone have a great weekend, and go Cards.